Globally, modular has been much more widely adopted than it has specifically for the UAE. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is, globally, in Europe, in America, Australia, the cost of labor for skilled and trained people is now significant, right? So the industry in Europe, America, and Australia, they've been forced into change, into the improving efficiency and the way that they do things, try to make things faster and cheaper, because there has to be a real drive there because there's a shortage of skilled personnel. So those personnel, um, you know, they cost a lot more than they do here in the UAE. So moving activities offsite where you can produce a lot more efficiently than you would on a traditional construction site makes sense. So from that side, I mean that I believe that that's why modular has been widely adopted in those regions. In the UAE, the demographic is a little bit different. So labor historically has been a lot cheaper here than it is in Europe and America. Um, so the necessity for the construction industry to change in this region is not there yet. What we see currently in the industry in the UAE is a lot of the skilled guys are extremely busy. There's a lot of high profile projects going on in the region at the moment, down in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and also now in Ras Al Khaimah. So the industry now is starting to shift because, kind of the low cost, simpler developments, they're struggling to find skilled workers. Historically, we have problems finding skilled joinery manufacturers, skilled tilers, and it's the same with the traditional construction side, right? If you're everybody wants to work on the high cost luxury developments. So all of your joinery guys are fully tied up. All of your skilled personnel when it comes to tiling and MEP, everybody in the industry is busy. So for the developments where it's very cost prohibitive, such as low-rise residential, staff accommodation, labor accommodation, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to find skilled personnel and the labor force to actually produce these projects in a conventional way. So we can see that now that there's a market shift, and a need to improve because the rate that these developments need to be built at, it's becoming impossible to build them now in a traditional way because the manpower or the skilled manpower is just not there in the industry. So we're the busiest we've ever been when it comes to tendering in projects in the UAE for modular buildings. So that just gives you an indication in itself that the market now is starting to change. But the reason it's not been more widely adopted is purely because of that, because it's always been relatively cheap to produce traditionally. So there hasn't really been a drive to change and be more efficient because historically, it's just been fine. There hasn't been that need to move from construction to production. But now it's coming. Everybody's busy in the market, and hopefully we're starting to finally see that shift here in the UAE as well, um, as we have done in Europe and America and Australia. There's many misconceptions in the market. Um, Historically, modular has been seen as kind of a temporary prefab solution. Oh, and it still is to a certain extent. Modular comes in different shapes and forms. One of them is kind of the temporary thing. Use it for site offices, temporary accommodation. But what we're really focused on is kind of the permanent high-end builds. More focused on permanent staff accommodation, um, housing, and hospitality. There is still a perception where people believe it's an inferior product. We have so many people come into our facility, start knocking on the walls, um, and they realise it's not block work, so it mustn't be quality. And that's just a general misconception. Just because it doesn't feel like concrete block, it feels a little bit different. They have a misconception that it's an inferior product. Where the reality is our walling systems and our flooring systems far exceed the performance of traditional block work. And it's in this region specifically, it's more of a cultural perception, and people believe that if it's not concrete, it's not quality, and that's just one of the hurdles that we have to get through to try and convert projects from a traditional build to a modular build. We started late 2019 actually, and so we started up in Dubai Industrial City. So we actually bought a facility which was an old galvanizing plant historically. So we completely renovated the factory. We put in some modular production lines. We put in all of the overhead cranes and gantries for lifting. We put in rails on the floor so the modules could actually move up a production line. So that was the intent. And LINQ originally was established to focus on export, kind of the European market. Um, After we first established, COVID hit, and the complete construction industry um, basically died for a couple of years. So we used that time at LINQ to refine our modular system. We started going through our modular system approval process with the Dubai municipality, because we could see that as being a regulatory challenge moving forward should we decide to start producing modules for the UAE and the GCC market. So we went through that authority process with the Dubai municipality, and we were successful in achieving actually the first modular building approval here in the UAE for a G+6 mixed-use development. And then back in coming out of 2022 and coming out of COVID, we could see that there was then a huge demand for modular buildings coming out of the GCC and specifically in Saudi Arabia. Out in the remote regions of Neom and the Red Sea, there was huge demand coming out of there at the time. So we refined our modular systems to suit the GCC market in terms of envelope performance and MEP performance initially. And then we could see that there was a cultural perception around the drywall system. So late 2024, we started then to kind of improve and change our walling systems, and we implemented a lightweight foam concrete wall infill, which meant that when you walked into a modular building and we had clients knocking on the walls, they couldn't tell the difference between a modular build and a traditional build. And that's what really kind of put us on the map when in terms of modular manufacture and modular being accepted in this market as a permanent build method. Typically, we focus on full 3D volumetric, where the modular frame is the superstructure of the building. I mean, to be honest with you, there are many bathroom pod suppliers that have been doing it for many years. We didn't really see the gap in the market for that because it already exists in the region. The reason we established LINQ is because nobody was currently doing that here at the time. There are other modular manufacturers here that are primarily focused on kind of your temporary builds, your site offices, your temporary accommodation solutions. But there was actually nobody here in the region focused on permanent volumetric modular building. Historically, getting modular to click is in this region has been difficult, and it's multifaceted, right? One is end user perception, which we believe we have a solution and we've managed to bridge that gap. The second one was cost. So, I mean, modular manufacture has additional costs over and above what a traditional construction would, and that's purely because we've got factory overheads that a traditional build doesn't have. So we've got an overhead that we need to carry. We've got additional transport and craneage costs. So with LINQ, the ability to create that longevity in pipeline has always been difficult because the cost has always been a little bit more than traditional build. So you're asking people to pay a little bit more for a product, and it's something different that they're not used to. It's a tough sell. It's always been a challenge with any modular business throughout the world is really achieving a longevity in pipeline to keep your factory busy for an extended duration. A lot of modular businesses here and globally, if you're fortunate enough to make a profit on one project, you need additional projects coming off the back of that just to make sure that your factory doesn't stand still, because The thing with modular, you have a fixed cost, you have a factory cost that a traditional site wouldn't have. So to keep your product cost efficient, your factory needs to be busy all the time to maintain it as a viable business. If let's say you're carrying a factory overhead. If your factory is empty for 3-4 months, that overhead is still there, and there's still bills that have to be paid, right? So for it to be a viable factory and a viable business, you need to maintain that pipeline. With modular in the permanent build space, in this market as it currently is, and not being readily accepted, we don't believe it's entirely feasible to have a modular facility here if that pipeline can't be filled. So with that, we decided to create a manufacturing partnership with SIBS. The reasoning of the partnership with SIBS is also multifaceted. One, they are more cost competitive than we could be producing out of Dubai. They have an established supply chain out in Malaysia with better costing products that go into the modules. So even when you consider the additional shipping that comes with producing out in Malaysia, it's a lot more cost efficient. So it makes us a lot more cost competitive in this market when it comes to villas, town housing, and staff accommodation solutions. So that's win number one. And then win number two is out of LINQ in DIC, we had the capability to produce around 1,500 modules per year. SIBS by capacity in comparison could produce up to 12,000 modules per year. So in terms of our ability to deliver at scale, this partnership with SIBS really increases our capacity fivefold. So with these mega projects, when it comes to villas, staff accommodation, and housing, we were pricing jobs historically. Our price point was a little bit too high producing out of Dubai, and it would take us, let's say it was going to take us 2 years to produce 3,000 modules. Now with SIBS, we can actually be cost competitive when compared to a traditional build, and we can reasonably deliver those projects in much shorter time. So in terms of our ability to price and deliver projects competitively, it really does increase our capacity and our ability to deliver exponentially. SIBS historically have been delivering into Europe. They're looking also to expand globally. They've just secured their first work in Australia. They've delivered over 2,000 apartments out in Saudi Arabia. The UAE is a complete new geography for them. So from their side, they really needed a partner that kind of understood this market. That understands the approval processes, how clients work, how the payment structures work. So as a partnership, it's a win-win really for both entities. SIBS, they want to do what they're good at, which is designing and manufacturing modules. And for LINQ and LINQ's involvement in the partnership, we are focused on basically doing everything on the ground. So we are the contracting party with the client. We focus on compliance, authority submissions, client liaison, payments, obviously, and then on the ground logistics and delivery. The market is shifting, and there is a big drive from all of the big players here to change the way that they do things and to industrialize their manufacture. What we're seeing at the moment is mainly through villas and staff accommodation. They're the two verticals that we really see progress, and that kind of makes sense, right? Because if you look at the villa market here, they're not very bespoke in nature. They're quite cookie cutter in terms of layout and their look and feel. So modular to that extent makes sense. There's very few typologies. The volumes are very large. So villas and modular construction really go hand in hand. And it's the same for staff accommodation. Typically staff accommodation developments, they're not high-rise developments. They're low-rise to mid-rise, but they're very repeatable and very scalable. And we're also now seeing demand starting to come through for kind of your 3-star/4-star business hotels. where modular hotel rooms, again, hotel rooms, they're very copy and paste. You know, you've probably only got three different types of hotel rooms in a single hotel, which makes modular construction ideal. You really see the benefit in modular where you can really utilize the time benefit. So modular, traditionally, we have the capability to deliver projects up to 50% faster. So where modular really makes sense is build to rent. So if you're building a staff accommodation that you're leasing out and you can take advantage of the faster route to market. So let's say you finish your project a year earlier than you would be on a traditional build. You've got an additional year's worth of revenue to build into your financial projections. That's when it really makes sense. And it's the same with hospitality. You know, if you're building a hotel, if you can get your hotel faster to market by a year and a half, you've got at least an additional year of revenue on your hotel than you would versus a traditional build. So build to lease or build to rent really makes sense. Hospitality makes sense. The thing that really makes modular work is scalability and repeatability. So what we don't really look at is your highly bespoke villa and building developments, because you know with that you don't really get something that you can put through your factory at sufficient volume. So really what we're looking at is kind of your mid-range townhouses, apartments, and your 3-star / 4-star hotels, where you don't have a super level of luxury, not because it's not achievable, but it's not really efficient to put it through your factory. We're really excited with the potential and the volumes that are actually coming out of this market now. You know, we've got mega developments now coming down in Abu Dhabi with the announcement of Disney World. The new airport up in DWC is going to see a significant demand for housing around that area, and also staff accommodation. And then also up in Ras Al Khaimah with the development of Wind, which is another of ALEC's projects. That's really boosted the economy up in Ras Al Khaimah as well. So there's also a lot of development work going on up there. So we're really excited about the UAE market specifically. We can see a lot of demand coming for modular and a lot of excitement actually around the modular market. There's a lot of talk about modular, a lot of interest. So yeah, it's exciting. And this partnership with SIBS, that goes hand in hand with that, because now we've really got a real capability to deliver at scale at a price point that's competitive.